Mark Dawson had spent most of his adult life behind the wheel of a truck, watching the country unfold in long ribbons of asphalt and sky. People imagined the open road meant freedom, but for Mark, it had slowly become an escape, one he didn't want to admit he needed. Home didn't feel like home anymore. Every return meant another round of quiet dinners, another week of strained conversations, another reminder that the space between him and his wife, Laura, had grown into something neither of them dared to name. They weren't angry, and they weren't cruel. They were simply elsewhere. Two people still married on paper, but emotionally miles apart, even when they shared the same kitchen, the same bedroom, the same bed. On this particular night, his eyes burned from a 14-hour shift. He told dispatch he'd push to the next stop, but halfway through a stretch of highway in Nebraska, fatigue hit him like a physical weight. The nearest truck stop, an aging place with flickering signage, looked like salvation. He pulled into a spot, shut off the engine, and stretched his aching back. The air smelled like diesel, warm asphalt, and faint coffee drifting from the diner. Inside the garage attached to the stop, a young man worked beneath a lifted pickup. Mark only noticed him because of the laugh, light genuine, and so out of place in a dim, dusty shop. The guy rolled out on a mechanic's creeper, wiping grease from his hands. He couldn't have been more than his late 20s. Slim build, messy hair, sleeves pushed up, revealing forearms smudged with streaks of work. "Hey, man," he called out, offering a smile that was far too bright for the hour. "Rough shift." Mark blinked, surprised someone spoke to him at all. Most mechanics barely glanced up unless a truck needed a full inspection. "Yeah, long day. Just needed a break." "Evan," the guy said, stepping forward and extending a hand. "I help out around here. You okay? You look like you're carrying the weight of 3 states on your shoulders." Mark chuckled despite himself. "Feels like it sometimes. Mark." The handshake was brief, but something about it lingered. Maybe the warmth, maybe the sincerity. He wasn't used to someone asking if he was okay, much less someone meaning it. Driver stayed tough, quiet, distant. Evan wasn't any of those things. "You need anything looked at? Tires, engine lights? I'm around all night." "My truck's fine," Mark answered, though he wasn't sure why he suddenly wished it wasn't, because this stranger's voice had softened something inside him, loosened a knot he didn't know was there. Evan studied him with a kind attentiveness that felt unfamiliar. "You sure? Or do you just need a minute to breathe?" That comment hit harder than Mark expected. He cleared his throat, looking toward his truck, as if he'd left something running. "Just tired. Been one of those weeks." "One of those months," Evan corrected gently. "You've got that look." Mark didn't know what look he meant, but he didn't ask. If he did, he might have heard the truth. He ended up talking longer than planned. 10 minutes, maybe 15, about nothing and everything. Traffic, weather patterns, favorite diners on the interstate. Evan made everything feel lighter, easier. When Mark finally headed toward his truck, he caught himself glancing back. Evan was already rolling under another vehicle, but before he disappeared completely, he flashed one last smile. That smile stuck with Mark far longer than it should have. Inside the cab, he lay back on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He tried to focus on anything else, the hum of distant engines, the creak of the sleeper, the ping of cooling metal. But his mind kept wandering, returning to Evan's voice, the way he listened, the easy charm he didn't seem to know he had. Why did it bother him so much? Why did it stay with him? Maybe it was because someone looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in a long time, not with disappointment, not with frustration, not with exhaustion, with interest, with warmth, with something he couldn't define. Laura used to look at him that way. Years ago, before the silence, before life pulled him in different directions. Mark didn't want to read into anything. He'd never thought about another man like that. Not once. But something about tonight nudged a part of him he didn't know existed, or maybe something he'd buried long ago without realizing. He tossed and turned for an hour, unable to sleep. His thoughts circled the same point, that smile, the way it made him feel seen, alive, unsettled. Around 4 a.m, he made a decision he tried to frame as logical, practical, professional. He would get his truck inspected before hitting the road. Not because it needed it, but because Evan would be there. Mark woke before the sun, the cab of his truck still dim and cold. His body felt heavy from the restless night, but his mind buzzed with something else. An anticipation he didn't want to name. He told himself he was only going back to the garage for a basic checkup, something any responsible driver would do. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the real reason. He had barely known Evan for 20 minutes, yet the thought of seeing him again tugged at him with a strange intensity he couldn't shake. He splashed water on his face, ran a hand through his hair, and stepped out onto the quiet truck lot. The air held the sharp chill of early morning, and the sky had just begun to pale. Most of the lot was still asleep. Dark cabs, dim streetlights, engines ticking softly as they cooled. But the garage glowed in the distance, lights already on. Someone was inside. Mark stepped slowed as he approached. He didn't want to seem too eager. He didn't even know why that mattered. But it did. Evan looked up the moment he walked in, as if he had been expecting him. "Morning, Mark," he said with a smile that felt brighter than the fluorescent lights above them. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep?" Mark shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Figured I'd get a quick inspection before heading out." "Sure," Evan said, though his eyes held a knowing gentleness. "Pull her in. I'll take a look." As Mark backed the truck into the bay, he felt his pulse pick up. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. He had driven through tornado warnings, icy mountain passes, and traffic jams that stretched for miles. But somehow, standing in this garage with a kind-eyed mechanic made him feel nervous in a way he hadn't felt since he was a teenager. Once the truck settled, Evan grabbed his tools and hopped up onto the side step. "Mind if I check inside the cab?" he asked. "Go ahead," Mark replied, climbing up behind him. The small space suddenly felt too intimate, too warm, too filled with quiet possibilities he wasn't sure he could handle. Evan leaned over the dashboard, checking wiring and lights, and Mark tried not to stare. But he couldn't help noticing the way the morning light softened Evan's features, or the way he hummed gently under his breath while he worked. "You ever get lonely out here?" Evan asked without looking up. The question hit harder than expected. "Sometimes," Mark admitted, "more than I probably should." Evan paused, turned to face him fully. "It shows." Mark's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Last night, you looked like someone who needed a friend." Evan's voice was soft, but sincere. Most drivers come through here rushed or annoyed or half asleep. You looked worn down, like the world was asking more of you than you could give. Mark wasn't used to anyone seeing him that clearly. Not even Laura. Not anymore. "It's been a rough year," he said quietly. "Long hauls, long silences at home. Sometimes it feels like I'm driving in circles." Evan nodded slowly. "I get that. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." But Mark did want to. That realization startled him. They talked for nearly an hour, about marriage, about routine, about the strange ache that came from living a life that looked fine on the outside but felt empty on the inside. Evan listened with such patience, such gentle interest, that Mark found himself opening up more than he'd meant to. At one point, their hands brushed when they both reached for the same clipboard. It was nothing, barely a touch, but it sent a quiet spark up Mark's arm, something warm and unsettling. He glanced at Evan, expecting to see confusion or embarrassment. Instead, Evan just smiled softly, as if he understood the moment but didn't want to push it. Mark cleared his throat and stepped back. "Sorry." "Don't be," Evan said, voice steady. "It happens." But it didn't just happen. Not for Mark. Not like that. When Mark's phone buzzed, he glanced at the screen. Laura's name. He hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button. Then, without thinking, he pressed ignore. "You don't have to stay," Evan said gently, noticing the moment. "I know you've got a life outside here." "Yeah," Mark said, but his voice didn't carry the conviction it should have. "I know." The inspection finished, but neither of them moved to end the conversation. It wasn't about the truck anymore. It was about the quiet comfort building between them. Something fragile, something real, something Mark hadn't felt in years. As he finally stepped down from the cab, he turned back. "You working tomorrow morning?" Evan wiped his hands on a rag, giving him that familiar warm smile. For you? Yeah, I'll be here. Mark walked away with a heart heavier and lighter at the same time, realizing the truth he'd been avoiding. He wasn't just confused. He was drawn to Evan in a way he couldn't explain, and in a way he wasn't sure he wanted to fight. Mark didn't sleep long after leaving the garage. He drifted in and out, his mind replaying the morning in looping fragments. Evan's smile, their quiet conversations, the way his hand had lingered a split second longer than it should have when passing back the clipboard. Nothing inappropriate had happened, nothing forbidden, but emotionally, something had shifted so clearly that ignoring it felt impossible. He woke before his alarm, heart tapping with a nervous anticipation he didn't recognize. For years, mornings had been routine, stretch, coffee, ignition, highway. But today he lingered, straightening his shirt, checking himself in the mirror, brushing his hair twice even though he hadn't done that since his 20s. He felt ridiculous, yet he couldn't stop himself. He wanted to look presentable, not for the road. For Evan, when he stepped into the crisp morning air, the sky was a pale blue with streaks of pink. The quiet hum of the truck stop almost soothed him. But the moment he saw someone standing outside the garage with 2 paper cups in hand, his breath caught. "Evan, you beat me," Evan said with a grin. "Thought I'd be the early one." Mark approached slowly, trying to keep his emotions steady. "Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd come by before heading out." "Well," Evan said, offering a cup, "I got us coffee. Hope you like it black." Mark accepted it, their fingers brushing again, softly, unintentionally, yet meaningful enough to send a ripple through his chest. "Thanks," he murmured. They walked behind the garage where the noise softened and the world felt smaller, quieter, a little safer. They stood near a stack of old tires, sipping coffee in silence. It should have felt awkward. Instead, it felt like the only place Mark wanted to be. "You seem different today," Evan said finally. Mark stared into his cup, watching steam curl upward. "I don't know what I am today." "You don't have to define it," Evan said, voice warm. "Not everything needs a label right away." Mark looked up, meeting the younger man's eyes. Honest eyes. Kind eyes. The kind he didn't know he'd been missing. "My whole life has been planned," Mark said. "Do this, be that, stay steady. Don't question anything. I never thought—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I never thought I'd feel something like this." Evan didn't move closer, but he didn't step away either. "You're allowed to feel things, Mark. You're allowed to be human." "But I'm married," Mark said softly, the truth twisting in his chest. "And you're making me question things I never questioned before." Evan's expression softened further, though his voice stayed steady. "I don't want to be the reason you hurt someone. And I don't want you to think I'm trying to pull you into something you're not ready for." "I know," Mark said. "You've done nothing wrong. It's me. It's my life that's complicated." A breeze drifted through the lot, carrying the muted sounds of trucks refueling in the distance. Evan set his cup down on a workbench, then looked at Mark with a quiet sincerity. "Can I tell you something?" Evan asked. "Yeah. When you walked in yesterday, you looked lost. Today, you look scared, but in a way that makes me think you're finally listening to yourself." Mark exhaled shakily, feeling something inside shift. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know if this is just a moment or something more." Evan stepped just a touch closer, not closing the space fully, just enough that Mark felt his presence like warmth. "You don't have to make a choice today, and you don't owe me anything, but I'm glad you came back. I'm glad I got to know you, even just a little." The sincerity of it nearly undid Mark. For a brief second, he imagined leaning in, imagined closing the distance between them. But he stopped himself, not because he didn't want to, but because he wasn't ready for the consequences of what it meant. Instead, he whispered, "I don't want to hurt you either." Evan nodded slowly. "Then don't rush. Figure out what you need. Figure out who you are. I'll be okay." Their foreheads almost touched, close enough that Mark felt the warmth of Evan's breath, the quiet gravity pulling them towards something neither fully understood. It would have been so easy to close the last inch, but he didn't. He couldn't. And somehow, the restraint made the moment even more intimate. He stepped back first, painfully slow. I should get on the road. Yeah, Evan said softly. You probably should. They walked to the front of the garage in silence. When Mark climbed into his cab, Evan placed a hand lightly on the doorframe. Take care of yourself, Mark. And don't ignore what your heart's trying to tell you. Mark swallowed hard. Thank you. For everything. As he pulled away, he saw Evan in the mirror, hands in his pockets, watching the truck disappear into the morning light. The highway stretched out endlessly ahead, but for once, it didn't feel like escape. It felt like the beginning of a truth he was finally brave enough to face.